Hello and welcome to Prairie's Got the Goods Week. My name is Caitlin Rose-Seiler, and I am the Stewardship Coordinator with Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan, or PCAP. Today, Michael Champion from Ducks Unlimited Canada will be speaking about maximizing your on-farm assets. Saskatchewan's grasslands and other natural areas are key to mitigating and adapting to climate change. I'd like to start by stating we respectfully acknowledge that we are on the traditional territories of many Indigenous nations and communities, past and present. For millennia, they have worked to protect these landscapes and the life these areas sustain. I would like to thank these original caretakers and acknowledge the ongoing work and presence of Indigenous peoples in Canada today. Before we get going, I'd like to mention that there are 5 other webinars happening this week for Prairie's Got the Goods Week. Topics include wetlands and flood prevention, pollination, carbon sequestration, and more. You can register for all of these webinars on the PCAP website. Just click on Upcoming Events and then Prairie's Got the Goods Week. And all past presentations can be found on the PCAP YouTube channel, and this one will be uploaded there in the near future. And a reminder to our listeners out there, if you have any questions during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the questions section of the webinar dashboard at any time during the presentation. And if you are on a cell phone, you can send your question by chat to the organizer, and questions will be answered at the end of the webinar. I would like to take a moment to note that financial support for today's webinar is provided by our presenting sponsors, Enbridge and Wildlife Habitat Canada. Our supporting sponsors are Eco-Friendly West, Information Services Corporation, Saskatchewan Cattlemen's Association. In-kind support has been provided by Ducks Unlimited Canada. As this is our opening webinar for Prairie's Got the Goods Week, I'm pleased to call up Andrew Rochon, speaking on behalf of our sponsor, Wildlife Habitat Canada.
Hello, everyone. Thanks very much for having me. My name is Andrew Rochon. I'm the Communications and Outreach Coordinator for Wildlife Habitat Canada. For those of you who aren't familiar with WHC, we're a federal not-for-profit conservation NGO. We were established in 1985, and since then, through the sale of the Canadian duck stamp, we've raised over $55 million towards conservation projects. We take funds generated by the sale of the Canadian duck stamp and the Canadian Migratory Game Bird Hunting Permit. And we invest this into conservation projects such as wetland restoration, invasive species management, hunter recruitment, and migratory bird surveillance, etc., along with many other projects across Canada. We're thrilled to have funded the Saskatchewan Prairie Conservation Action Plan once again and over the past few years and hopefully into the future, as the work that you guys do is so important and very critical for the habitat and Canadian wildlife, in particular migratory birds. The Prairie's Got the Goods and Native Prairie Speakers webinars have been very successful, and we're proud of you guys, and you've done a great job. They embody the goal, that WHC that we stand behind. I personally spend about 3 months of the year in Saskatchewan, so it's very close to my heart. I work for a waterfowl outfitter for the spring snow goose hunt, as well as in September and October. And you know, the work that you guys do directly impact that industry, as well as so many other at-risk areas in the province. So we just want to say thanks to you guys for doing such a great job and helping to promote us as well. We need to continue to support to promote the sales of the duck stamp, because the Canadian Wildlife Habitat Conservation Stamp, which is the long term for Canadian duck stamp, we need to continue to fund organizations such as yourself, and we need to do that for years to come. And through the sale of the duck stamp, we can make that happen.
Well, thank you, and thanks again for your support, for allowing us to do our Prairie's Got the Goods Week and our speaker series.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
So without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce our speaker today. Sorry. Michael Champion is the head of industry, head of industry and government relations for Ducks Unlimited Canada in Saskatchewan, focusing on wetland policy. Prior to taking his role, he delivered conservation programming, including forage restoration, forage yield estimates, and grazing plans with Saskatchewan ranchers. He also conducted rangeland health assessments in the former PFRA pastures and facilitated grassland reclamation activities with the oil and gas sector. Michael is a graduate from the University of Saskatchewan, holding a degree in agriculture with a specialization in ecology. Originally from Moose Jaw, Michael calls Regina home, where he lives with his wife Allison and 2 daughters, and he enjoys camping, hiking, and exploring the outdoors with his family. So with that, I'm pleased to pass it over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. And just one last, you got my presentation up or no?
Yes, perfect. Everything looks good.
We're good?
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. And yeah, as Caitlin said, I'm Michael Champion, the head of industry and government relations for Ducks Unlimited Canada, working primarily on, well, excuse me, wetland policy, but I have a long and storied history with grassland work, including the development of the range health tool in the early 2000s. I have been told lots that I have the face for radio, so I'm going to turn my webcam off because all I see right now when I look at the screen is myself. There, and get into the presentation here. So I know many of us here are grassland, working in the grassland sector. So largely we are, I'm talking to the converted here, but just as a reminder, Saskatchewan's grasslands, important assets for livestock producers, the entire ag sector and society. Grasslands and their associated wetlands, shrub and bush habitats, they're hotbeds of biodiversity with vast carbon stores, as well as the ability to sequester additional carbon. They are key to our provincial fight against climate change. In this presentation, I hope to expand on some of these items, explore the benefits of grassland wetland restoration, conservation, and the risks associated with the loss of these essential areas. Okay. Before we get there, just a little bit about who my employer is. So Ducks Unlimited Canada is a conservation a company. We work throughout Canada. Our mission statement here is on the slide for you to read. We achieve our mission through partnerships on the ground with Saskatchewan farm and ranch families. In Saskatchewan, we deliver a myriad of programs nationally, but focused on Saskatchewan here. Our programming ranges from conservation easements to forage restoration. We deliver winter wheat and moving back into the extension game, hopefully in the next few months. We're a company that employs a variety of engineers, biologists, and agrologists that help our farm and ranch families select the best program to fit their operation. Founded coming out of the Dust Bowl in 1938, we've been helping farmers put water back on the land ever since. Today, we're working with landowners in the ag and food sector, companies on a range of beneficial management practices and environmental services programming like forage establishment, prairie restoration, extension services. Our history is deeply rooted in the prairies, founded based in, I think our first project was in Manitoba. The second project, I believe, was in Saskatchewan. Before we get into the presentation, I think the big challenge that we have here is something, or I'd like to set a common understanding and maybe set the stage for what the rest of the presentation is going to be about, which is this big challenge on how do we sustainably produce food for a growing world. We have a growing population. It is going to require more food. We need to protect the environment and the farm and ranches that grow that food. And the big challenge is doing this sustainably. So we can see here on this slide, the UN is estimating a 70 to 100% increase in food demand. We have increased wealth in the developing world, which puts pressure to provide a higher quality food product for them. And you can see we're going to grow about 2 billion people estimated in the next 30 years. So how do we meet the world's demand for food, have farms be profitable, and protect our environment without bringing a bunch more land into production? And I think that leads nicely into a map like this that shows the yellow is a habitat that's been lost, the green is intact habitat. If you look into Western Canada, you'll see that we have lost a lot of habitat. I think it's important that we ask ourselves why grasslands get broken. you look at the history of Western Canadian in settlement, the settlers were asked to break native prairie to homestead. And so we've got this history of breaking native prairie to grow crops. The markets have historically signaled the need to break prairie and bring crop into production. And recent and historic droughts have forced many to break marginal land to try and increase the on-farm efficiencies of cropping. Also, we've seen efficiencies in crop input products, and the farming equipment has allowed for that conversion of marginal land to cropping. Now, all this being said, I think it's important that we not demonize those past practices, nor should we demonize those that are making difficult decisions today. Many of the people that are breaking land today have livestock or have cattle in their operation, and they are making difficult decisions to try and earn a livelihood. I think it's also important that we remember that when a farmer takes their commodity to market, they're paid only for weight, protein, or oil. And if the market cares about other things like carbon, habitat, or biodiversity, we should probably be looking at ways to pay for those commodities as well. So we need to develop the support tools, programs, and policies to support our farms and ranches to protect the remaining habitat and restore those acres that we can. And Ducks Unlimited Canada is working on this issue, and we would like to expand upon our work with the ag sector to find solutions so landowners can realize economic benefits of stewarding their natural areas. Okay, and I think when we look at grasslands, many of us know what they offer. Biodiversity is one of the things that pops to the top of mind. In Saskatchewan, it's been estimated that between 50 to 100 different plant species can live on the same quarter section of land. And hundreds, if not thousands, of different animal species, from birds and frogs to deer and insects, can occupy the same quarter section of land. We know that there's about 30 species of risk that make their home in Saskatchewan grasslands, and nationally that's about 60 species that make their home in a Canadian grassland context. We also know that grassland bird populations have seen about an 87% decline since 1970, largely due to habitat loss. And the majority of the habitat that remains is being managed privately by landowners. And on top of the remaining habitat that's being managed, we know that habitat is also sequestering billions of tons of carbon. Canada Parks and Wilderness Society has estimated that between 2 to 3 billion tons of carbon per hectare lies in that first meter of uncultivated grassland soil. And I think that almost in and of itself highlights the need for proactive policy objectives that will work with private landowners to protect the remaining habitat and restore those parts of the habitat that have been lost that are eligible for restoration. I'd just like to take a few minutes here and delve into a couple of species that I think many of us will be aware of. Highlights the need for solid grassland protection policy and grassland restoration policy. So the first one, the little monarch butterfly, is an endangered species. It requires milkweed and other wildflowers to complete its life cycle. It's threatened largely due to climate change and habitat loss. The milkweed is a required species for the monarch caterpillar, and then it requires a variety of nectar sources as it migrates south and then back up north. And according to the Canadian Wildlife Federation, there are thousands of hectares of potential habitat for monarchs in grassland, and the grassland restoration that could be done is relatively simple to do. We just need to make sure that we have appropriate species in there to help this little butterfly. The next species, the Brewing Owl, another endangered species that makes its home on shortgrass habitat, and it requires adequate prey species and other burrowing owls for which to make its home. It too is threatened largely due to habitat loss and fragmentation. Predation of other burrowing animals that they rely on for their burrows is also an issue. So I think in the Southwest, the loss of the black-footed ferret has been an issue, and then I think in the rest of the province, badgers is probably another animal that we need to maybe be thinking about how we manage if we want to focus on burrowing owls. Okay, and this owl remains endangered despite the very well-intentioned and ongoing conservation of conservation-minded landowners. So this is a species that we put some effort into nationally and provincially, and they just haven't seen the recovery I think that people would like to see. Upland protection and restoration coupled with adequate prey species, so grasshoppers, other insects, small mammals, and stable burrowing animals for them to make their homes is a key to their success. Rotational grazing also might play a role in the establishment and re-establishment of burrowing owl populations. And then the last species is the dragonfly. So globally, 40% of species rely on wetlands for part of their life cycle. Dragonflies provide a unique insight into how biodiversity loss has a trickle-down effect to other species. We know that many wetlands are embedded inside grassland habitat, and as we lose grassland, we lose those wetland habitats, which then provides a loss of dragonfly species. And we see with climate change, we've got an upward migration potentially of other species that are offsetting our native species, and you couple that with habitat loss, and we may see how that problem is exacerbated. Okay. So in a Canadian context, Ducks Unlimited Canada, we're often viewed exclusively as a wetland-focused company. And while it may be true in the last 6 or 7 years, that certainly is the thing that I've been talking about the most in my day-to-day life. We do care about grasslands as well. As you can see in this picture, you can see that we've got lots of wetlands embedded in grassland and in cropland. So wetlands are not just a unique feature on the landscape. Canada holds a quarter of the world's remaining wetlands. But in Canada, we only have about a quarter of our remaining native prairie. And they do continue to be at risk of loss. In 1990, Saskatchewan had about 70% of its land cover in grassland, which was about 41,000 square kilometers. But by 2015, it had eroded to about 14%, or about 33,000 square kilometers. And there is a clear connection between cattle, grass, and water. 52 million acres of grassland that remains in Canada. Much of it is sustainably managed by private cattle farmers and ranchers. And inside that 52 million acres of grassland, we've got about 1.6 million acres of wetlands. And in Canada, beef production accounts for about a third of the total agricultural land, but yet they've got about 70% of the wildlife capacity. So these privately managed grassland ecosystems are punching well above their weight, and the private individuals that are managing those systems are doing a bang-up job. And again, I think we just need to focus a little bit on policy objectives and get programming to help support them. I would encourage everybody to go to beefstrategy.com and see what the beef sector is doing to address some of the emerging issues with their sector. Not only are they addressing species at risk, they are addressing carbon. They want to maintain and expand the native grassland in the country, and they want to be the guardians of the grasslands and wetlands. They want to protect water, filter nutrients, building drought and flood resiliency. Again, I think check out beefstrategy.com to see more of what they're doing. And the interesting thing about beefstrategy.com or the beef sector in general, they got there on their own. They may have influence from other ENGO companies, but by and large, the beef sector saw an issue, saw that they have a solution to that issue, and kind of went on their own to get there. So there's a good news story here. When we talk about the threats to grassland, I think we need to understand what a little bit about what's driving these threats, and again, it comes back to market for me anyway. So if we want to have protocols that monetize environmental goods and services, and if we all agree that we need these developed to support farmers and ranchers, we need to understand what we're selling to get a market developed. So we can't really expect the market to be developed until we know exactly what we're selling. So I think we need to lay clear what our expectations are for those private managers that are managing this resource, and then develop that market and get the policy and program in place for them. Okay, there is a lack of grassland policy. That's just a statement of fact. It is not illegal to break grassland in any province in Canada that I'm aware of. And according to Nature Canada, we've got about 1% remaining of the grasslands in Alberta and Saskatchewan that are protected. Now, does this mean that all grassland is at risk of loss tomorrow? Not at all. But it does highlight that one of the most important ecosystems are essentially operating on the goodwill of a few grassland managers in the two provinces. Policy and program support would be nice to see to help them. Okay, and then wetland policy, and we've got a patchwork of different wetland policies throughout Western Canada. We know that they could be good for cattle, but they could also act as a source of income for crop producers on low productivity land. Wetlands that go dry in late summer could be cut for additional feed. There's research coming out of the U of S that's beginning here shortly, that's looking into whether it makes financial sense to drain wetlands. And then companies have different programs that will address this issue as well on the wetland side. But again, if we can develop a market, and if carbon and biodiversity is something that we value, we should probably develop that market, which will inform policymakers, and maybe we'll get wetland and grassland policy a little stronger in Western Canada. Okay, and we need landscape scale conservation. Scalable solutions for mainstream agriculture. Niche markets are good for a niche client base, but we need large scale solutions to meet the growing food demand. Okay, there's a lot of companies and governments are interested in carbon, and the emerging carbon markets are an excellent opportunity for conservation and restoration of upland and wetland habitat. Okay. We need to work within the existing supply chain for small changes with big impact. We need to explore growing more on the existing land base. Farm the best, conserve the West type of approach. And again, Ducks Unlimited Canada wants to work with the ag sector to find those solutions that will allow landowners to realize the economic benefits of stewarding their natural areas. And that leads a little bit into a discussion around sustainable intensification. We need to increase production, increase input efficiency, and build on conventional and alternative ag. We need to embrace science and technology to increase production on the existing land base to protect the remaining natural areas. In 2016, the Ag Census data showed that roughly 8% of the farms accounted for 2/3 of the gross receipts. So that means if we want to influence the landscape, we need to find solutions that work for large and mainstream agriculture. Working on the high number low acre farms cannot and will not get us there. So again, I think that just hammers home the small amount of farms that have the biggest amount of impact and the need to address programming and policy that will work inside that system. And of interest, there was a study by PFRA done a few years ago that showed about 28% of the prairies are economically or environmentally unsustainable. That is, they have one or more problems that are causing them either a loss of profit or a loss of function on the farm. And I know that stat was a little surprising to me, that 28% of the prairies are economically or environmentally unsustainable. And Ducks Unlimited Canada came up with a program that we hope will address that. And it's the Marginal Areas program. And here, if we look at our fictitious quarter section here, the red areas are areas where the farmer is losing money on their annual crop. Green areas are where they're making a lot of money. And the Marginal Areas program is targeted at the red sections on this map. Now, if you look at the kind of the red line in the middle there, probably not going to do restoration work in the middle of a field. But if you look to the south and east, if north is up on this map, if you look in the lower right-hand corner there, that looks like that's an area that's ripe for retirement. We can retire that land. The farmer may actually notice an increase in on-farm profitability because they're not going to be losing money in that little area. And then we do away with some of the other issues and challenges that come with restoration in a cropping system. The farmer will still be able to farm in relatively straight lines. If we square off a portion of that field, they'll have increase in their other efficiencies. They'll realize the increase in their efficiencies, and we can focus on retirement of that land. Now, the Marginal Areas program pays the farmer a one-time fee to retire the land, and then they are able to manage the grassland. If it's grassland restoration, they do however they choose. They've got a pasture that just happens to adjoin their field. They can fence it out and graze it. Haying it is also permissible in that program. And if it's a wetland restoration that they want to do, there might be other programs that can kind of tag on top of that. Now, if we're going to focus on retiring the red areas, that means that we have to be open to the idea to increase the intensity that we farm the green areas, and we can't do one without the other. So, if we're going to be retiring land, that means that we're going to be probably increasing our intensity in other areas of the quarter section. Okay, and the opportunity really is now. We do have a sustainability movement in Canada. There has been increased pragmatic engagement by ENGOs, not just ducks, but others in the country. And then, as shown a couple slides ago with the beef industry slide, the ag industry is there, and they're ready to take action. They're just waiting for market signals to help them along. We've got a really good example of the sustainability movement working with the pragmatic ENGO community, and that's in the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, a conglomerate of various companies and various ENGOs working together to achieve a sustainable product. And then you can see there that there was 7.4 million pounds of this year of beef that was sold with a sustainable beef claim, so which is good. The other thing that I'd like to talk about just briefly is regenerative agriculture. So regenerative agriculture, for those that are unfamiliar, is the integration of crop and livestock and conservation together. It's a hot topic lately, and we believe that there is the potential to have conservation integrated in with the crop and livestock production. Ducks Unlimited Canada is no stranger to regenerative agricultural principles, minimizing soil disturbance, increasing diversity, the maintenance of a living root, the optimization and use of synthetic inputs, and integration of livestock. For decades, Ducks has been promoting some form or other of these principles, whether it be our forage program, which I first delivered in '99 as a summer student for Ducks Unlimited Canada, the 4R nutrient management principles that Ducks Unlimited Canada supports and agrees with, integrated pest management on a farm. The Marginal Areas program also is really a regenerative agriculture principle. Pollinator Power Pack, getting those the pollinator species in there so that you can get bees and butterflies into your field. Forages in rotation, another program that Ducks has offered in the past. Crop and livestock integration is growing with the use of more and more byproducts used in livestock feed, like canola oil or canola meal and pea screenings. And in fact, when sectors integrate this way, there's less waste and a smaller carbon footprint. But let's not forget that those beef cattle that can use crop waste also need grasslands. Without cattle, the crops have a larger footprint. But further, if we lose beef acres, i.e. grasslands, to crops, we lose much more than beef. So again, hammering on that need for policies to protect what remains and restore what can be restored. Okay, there is value in natural areas, and who's punching well above their weight? Grasslands and wetlands. They are doing a phenomenal job on the landscape. They are two of the most biodiverse ecozones in Western Canada, and they provide a myriad of species that help with cropping. They can help with the fight against climate change. And for those of you that may not have seen the Karen Briere article in the Western Producer from a couple years ago, messy fields may help the bottom line. I would encourage you to Google that and take a quick read on Karen's take on what messy fields can provide for annual croplands. The same amount of carbon that is stored by implementing zero-till on a quarter section of cropland for 25 years can be achieved by protecting only 4 acres of wetlands. So again, who's punching above their weight class? Grasslands and wetlands are. And having natural areas embedded in cropland has been shown to increase yield. And then just to kind of quickly wrap up on some of the topics here today, grasslands are extremely important. Biodiversity, carbon sequestration, wetland retention, all part of healthy grasslands. They are at risk. We know that ongoing loss places ecosystem services at risk, and that the policy tools are needed by the sector to support both the livestock and the cropping sector. And with that, I'd just like to give a shout out to Christine Tapley, Carly Reimer, and Paul Thorogood that helped with some of the stats and the design and of the presentation. And with that, Caitlin, I'd turn it over for some questions if there are any.
First of all, thank you so much for the awesome presentation. It was really great. There's definitely some really powerful statements that you said there. So thank you for sharing your insights with us today. We don't have any questions at the moment. To any of our listeners out there, if you have any questions, feel free to type it into the question section of the webinar dashboard. And I would also like to remind everyone, while we're waiting for a few questions to come in, that you can go to PCAP's website and register for other webinars going on this week. There's 5 more webinars. And I would like to let everyone know that when you do leave this webinar, there will be a quick 1-minute survey that'll pop up. So if you don't mind filling that out, we really appreciate it. We'd like to continue our Prairie's Got the Goods week going into the future. So Michael, a listener named Dina is wondering if lobbying work is being done to slow the sale of Crown land.
There is lobby efforts in Saskatchewan. I know I'm less interested in who owns the land as opposed to how it's being managed. And I think we've seen through the sale of both PFRA and the Saskatchewan food pastures that these lands can be sustainably managed by private industry. The vast majority of the grasslands that are no longer being actively managed are in some sort of lease. So yeah, I think while there are lobby efforts going on, I think we should be focused on making sure that grass stays the right side up, should be priority one. And maybe the secondary priority is who is actually owning it.
Thank you for that answer. There's a few questions coming in. I just want to let everyone know that because we have over 100 people on the line, there isn't the option to ask a question verbally. So just feel free to type it in into the question section. If you're on a cell phone app, you can send it by chat to the organizer. So the next question, Michael, is listener named Ian is wondering if you can repeat the statistic on carbon sequestered by no-till versus wetland protection.
Yes. And just to make sure I get it right, let's go back into my notes here.
I'm going to write it down too.
So a quarter section that's zero-tilled for 25 years sequesters the same amount of carbon as 4 acres of wetland. So 4 acres into 160. So.
And for the wetland statistic, is that for 25 years or is that just for like 1 year?
I'm pretty sure that's a 1 year. That's a 1 year stat. So
wow.
In the lifetime of farming, you know, if you protect 4 acres, you potentially do the same. And we should still zero till. The message here is not zero till is bad. The message here is wetland protection is good and zero till is also good. It's not, yeah, the message there is we should still zero till.
Yes, I like that message. Wetlands are good. We have a webinar tomorrow called Disentangling the Effects of Wetlands and Flooding. It should be really interesting. It's by Chris Spence with Environment and Climate Change Canada. So just thought I'd throw a pitch in for that. And I should also mention Ian Cook. The name seems very familiar to me, and it's because Ian was an author of 3 different articles about the importance of grasslands. And this week, PCAP is actually featuring those 3 articles on our social media. So I think they're scheduled for Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday this week about 12:30. And I would definitely recommend everyone check out our social media, and then you can find these really awesome articles about the benefits of the prairie ecosystem. So sorry, the next question from Daniel. You mentioned that 8% of farms produce 2 out of 3 of farm receipts, and you mentioned that these farms will need to be sustained by increasing intensification. Are these farms not already highly intensified? How much more can be done to increase intensification without causing environmental losses?
Yeah, that's a good question, and we're going to quickly get out of my wheelhouse of expertise. But I think the message here is we need to find programming that works with that small percent of farms, and I know a lot of companies go after the smaller acreages, and that's good to do, but we need to focus on that, the 2/3 of the food production, and then embrace science changes, and make sure that they can intensify. And yeah, I think there is work to be done. If we're asking them to retire some of their land, how does that intensification look? I am certainly not. I am not an expert in annual cropping by any stretch. So yeah, I'll maybe just quit there before I completely blunder the answer.
Okay, no problem. There's another one here about intensification.
Sorry, if you could put me in touch with that person, I can get them in touch with the right person inside the company that can answer that can actually answer that question very well. So please connect us. Please connect us offline. Yeah,
that's great. I'll just let Daniel know that your email is right there. To our attendees, you can also do a screenshot or just jot down this email address and then contact Michael directly. So thank you for that, Michael. So the next one is about agriculture intensification as well. So if you want to refer to somebody else, that's not a problem. So Branimir is wondering, he says, regarding the ag intensification, the estimate of food needed, 70 to 100% is overestimate. The question is, do we need to increase yield per acre or number of people fed per acre? For example, the decision what we grow.
Well, I think, yeah, Brandon, that's a good question. And again, we're outside of my wheel of expertise here, but I think the answer is both. I would think we need to be able to increase the number per acre and also the number of people per acre that we're feeding. But yeah, I know Branimir a little bit, so Branimir, I can connect you offline with the right person if you want to do a little deeper dive on that.
Thanks for that answer. And we do have a number of people that are interested in policy. So the first one, how can governments start the process of developing policy to support and pay producers who are creating biodiversity on their lands?
Yeah, I think so. I think the biodiversity angle is a great number two. I think the first one, because it's ready to go, is carbon. I think if we develop sideboards for carbon in the soil, that leads naturally to biodiversity. So, and the carbon market, is my understanding, is it's really close to being implemented in Saskatchewan. They're piloting it in Alberta, and we've got carbon buyers. So I think once carbon's, pardon the pun, off the ground, biodiversity is going to be the next one, and it's right there, ready to go. So get carbon, and then biodiversity will follow.
Awesome. That's a good way to look at it. I think that answers a couple of questions here at the same time. And the listening Peg is wondering if you would elaborate on what's needed for grassland policy.
Well, I think a better understanding of what all is available for sale, and again, I'll come back to the carbon market. If it's 2 to 3 billion tons in that first meter of soil per hectare, that's insane. There's an insane amount of potential there. So let's focus on that, and then I think it'll develop from there.
Awesome. Glenn is wondering if you have any rough estimate of the tons per hectare of carbon capture for grass versus zero till versus wetland versus marginal land converted back to grass.
No. The short answer is I do not. But and you know what, that might be an interesting article for the PCAP newsletter. We can look into that and see, because I am sure the estimates are there. I know I've seen wetland estimates. I don't know if we've done any research on the marginal areas program, but there's an interesting article there that I think we should maybe focus on.
Yeah, that's a great idea. And I should also let people know too that this is our 6th Prairie's Got the Goods week. We've done 5 others before, and we have had talks on carbon sequestration in grasslands, often by the Rangeland Research Institute at the University of Alberta, and those are all available on our YouTube channel. But again, I don't know if they actually, I can't remember off the top of my head, if they lay out all of that comparison. It would be a really good article. So yeah. So the next question is from Clint. Our current Saskatchewan government states they are not going to reverse wetland drainage that currently exists, but will license the drainage and bring it into compliance. Going forward, they have stated how much wetland will be protected of any new drainage project and are not going to have a no net loss policy going forward. This means less wetlands going forward. How does this fit with the restoring wetlands need that you and all the climate scientists say we have to do?
Yeah, and Clint, another good question. I think again, if we value carbon, if we value biodiversity, flood and drought mitigation, we need to have a market, a robust market there. And I'll on the wetland policy front, I like to tout a project that we signed on to just south of Moose Jaw, where we protected over 60% of the historical wetlands inside that drainage network. It's not perfect. by any stretch. And I think a diehard bird biologist will tell us that that's not great for birds specifically. But it strikes a little bit of the balance between development and conservation. And again, I think if we develop those other markets, and then we can show, and then the marginal areas will become even more profitable on top of, you know, the program that Ducks Unlimited Canada or others offer. So yeah, I recognize that there is a bit of a disconnect there, and hopefully with the emerging markets we can address that gap.
That's great. Thanks for that answer. And Branimir has the question again. For recreating wetlands on ag land, suggestion is to work on watershed scale rather than on a farm scale. It's more palatable to farmers. This option is good for the role of wetlands for mitigating the nutrient runoff. How would having a few larger wetlands impact hydrology and habitat availability compared to having more smaller ones? Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, and I do have thoughts, and I'm going to. So as I was announced, I'm an agrologist by training, and this I think is an engineering hydrologic question. So if we're looking at biodiversity, I think smaller wetlands with more edge is better for the larger network. If we're talking exclusively about nutrient management and flood management, the larger wetlands probably play a bigger role. Or could play a bigger role, especially for flood mitigation. You can build a pretty large wetland and hold a bunch of water back. Now, as a company that has 80 some years of experience in large wetland project management, we know that they become costly and they're difficult, not difficult in like management, but they become problematic as they age. And there's a huge liability issue. Which is why I think we should focus on working with what remains and not try and engineer our way out of this, but let the green, you know, the green engineering that we have, Mother Nature has put wetlands on the landscape for a reason, and let's protect what remains and let them function. So again, kind of hedging my bets there, but I think less or more smaller wetlands is better for some things. But if we're looking at just strictly management, a large wetland can do the job for flood mitigation.
Thanks for that answer. And then going back to Clint, he says they are going to use our conservation easement acres to justify more net drainage in our area. May we be promoting drainage accidentally? Do you have any comments about that?
Yeah, and that certainly is a concern I have. Moving forward as well is our when we negotiate, are we approving of things that are maybe not in the best interest down the road? And again, I don't necessarily have a great answer for it, because we're trying to work within the existing framework that we have, and we need acres to grow food, and without other markets to signal value, it's difficult. It's difficult to kind of get there. So.
Yeah. I should mention that last week, the Citizens for Environmental Alliance had a really great webinar series all about drainage, and it was the second session of a full drainage conference, and everything's online, and you can check out their YouTube channel or their website for links to some of those, and they had some really great resources there, so I just wanted to share that. So Michael, the next question we have here is from Dana. Any interest in increases in investor landholding in Saskatchewan and possibly less regard for conservation compared to profit margins?
I don't know if there's an increased interest from investor markets versus historically. I'm not aware. I know that some of the investment firms that have been buying land in Saskatchewan have been in the news over the last 2 years, but I haven't really looked into, is it an uptick or is it historically the same? But again, I think if the market's there, and we're not, and we're adding value to the land from an investment side of things, that's got to be a good thing. So I think I'll come back to, we need that market developed, which will be the basis for policy and program support tools, and then we can work way forward. And we should remember that there's national and international sustainability guidelines that have yet to be really implemented by anyone, but they're in the pipeline and they could be implemented. So if you're an investment owner and and there's some sustainability stamp on your land, and you pass or fail, that may affect the value of your land. So yeah.
Interesting. Thank you. That looks like all the questions that we have. We still have a few minutes left. If anyone has any last minute questions, if you want to type it in now, that would be great. But yeah, I'll give everyone another minute there. So just while we're giving everyone another minute to type in any last minute questions, I just wanted to again reiterate that we have lots of space left in our webinars this week. We have some really cool presentations going on, so check out the PCAP website and you can register for all of those there. On Thursday, Dr. Corey Sheffield with the RSM will be talking about pollination. We have a talk on Friday about carbon sequestration in grasslands. Wednesday, we will be talking about prairie strip. So planting native prairie in between crop fields. Quite interesting. And then Wednesday afternoon, a presentation about the ecological goods and services of the native prairie ecosystem from an Indigenous perspective. And then I'd already mentioned tomorrow is about wetlands. So yeah, definitely check out our website. So I don't think we have any more questions coming in, Michael. So I just wanted to thank you again for the awesome, I spoke too soon. Clint again, as you would know, in Manitoba, they now charge a fee for wetland drainage to put in a bank for organizations like yours to do exactly what you propose. And the US does this federally as well. Do you have any thoughts about that, Michael? Is that something that Saskatchewan should be doing?
Sorry, Caitlin, the very first part of your question, there was a skip on my end. Can you repeat it?
As you know, in Manitoba, they now charge a fee for wetland drainage to put in a bank for organizations like yours to do exactly what you propose. The US does this federally as well. Is this something that Saskatchewan could do?
Yeah, offset banking or well, and compensation for mitigation, or compensation inside the mitigation framework is certainly something that Saskatchewan could explore. And I remind, mitigation is avoid first, minimize second, and then compensate. So it's the third part of a mitigation scheme. So yeah, I think we shouldn't take anything off the table when we're talking about restoration policy on either grassland or wetland, and hold people to similar standards if we can. So yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for that answer. So I guess with that, that's all the questions we have right now. So I want to sincerely thank you, Michael, for the fantastic presentation today and for sharing all of your knowledge with us. So thank you.
Thank you.
To all of our listeners out there, thank you so much for attending, and hopefully we'll see you at another webinar this week for Prairie's Got the Goods Week. So with that, thank you so much, everyone, and have a great rest of your day.